Dear students, today we will discuss about population characteristics and population growth. And the main objectives of today's lecture are to gain knowledge about various characteristics of population, to describe various types of population growth, to gain insight into the factors affecting population size, and to understand the regulation of population size. A population is a group of individuals belonging to the same species living in an area at a given time. A population possesses specific characteristics as a group which are not exhibited by individual members. These characteristics of populations are shaped by the interactions between individuals and their environment. In general, two groups of characteristics are recognized. One, primary characteristics, second, secondary characteristics. Primary characteristics include size and density, natality, mortality, immigration and emigration. Secondary characteristics include population dispersion, age structure and genetic composition. Primary characteristics. Now, first is size and density. Population size simply refers to the total number of individuals in a particular area at a specific place, whereas the density is the number of individuals per unit area or volume of environment at a given time. Density of a population can be calculated by using following formula. D is equal to N divided by S, where D is the density, N is the total number of individuals and S the unit area or volume occupied by the population. Density of the population is of two types, namely crude density and ecological density. Crude density is that density which takes into account all area of land or aquatic ecosystems under consideration. For example, number of squirrels in a forest. Second, the ecological, specific or economic density. It's that density per unit of habitat space, that is available area that can actually be colonized by the population. Second important characteristic of a population is natality. Natality refers to the birth or production of new individuals or offsprings of an organism in a population. The new individuals can be formed through birth, as in human beings, through hatching, for example in chicken eggs, germination, for example in plants, or cell division, as in lower organisms. Natality is of two types. First, maximum or absolute natality. It is also known as fecundity rate. This natality is defined as the maximum number of offsprings produced under most suitable environmental conditions. This value is theoretical and constant for a given population. Now, second is the ecological natality. Ecological natality refers to the number of offsprings produced under prevailing environmental conditions. It is also known as fertility rate. Now, the third important characteristic of a population is the mortality. Mortality refers to death of individuals in a population, and the rate at which individuals die is referred to as the mortality rate. Now, mortality rate is of two types, minimum mortality rate, second the ecological mortality. Minimum mortality rate is also known as physiological longevity. It refers to the theoretical minimum death rate which occurs under ideal conditions of environment with minimum limiting factors. This value is theoretical value and constant for a given population. Ecological mortality is the death under actual environmental conditions. Now, the fourth important characteristic of a population is immigration. The movement of individuals or their disseminals into a population or population area is called immigration. It increases population size. Fifth important characteristic of a population is the immigration. The movement of individuals or their disseminals out of a population or population area is called immigration. It decreases population size. Now the secondary characteristics. Now first secondary characteristic of a population is population dispersion. Dispersion of a population refers to the manner in which individuals of a population are distributed in space and time. Three types of dispersion patterns are recognized in populations. One is regular or uniform dispersion, second the random dispersion, and the third clumped dispersion. Now, regular or uniform dispersion. In this type of dispersion, the individuals of a species distribute uniformly with almost equal distances between them. This type of dispersion is rare in natural ecosystems but common in man-made ecosystems like agroecosystems or tree plantations. Second, the random dispersion. In random dispersion, individuals do not show any systematic pattern of dispersion. That is, position of one individual in a population is unrelated to the position of other individuals. This type of dispersion is also rare in nature. Third, the clumped dispersion. In this type of pattern, the individuals of a species are clumped together in space in the form of patches. This type of patchy distribution is quite common in nature as the individuals of a population occur together because of food availability or better survival rate as in animal populations. Now, the second important secondary characteristic of a population is the age structure. Age structure of a population describes the proportion of individuals in different age groups occurring in a population. Generally, a population is divided into three age categories. One pre-reproductive, second reproductive, and the third post-reproductive. And the proportion of different stages, that is these three different stages in a population, determines the kind of a population. That is, whether population is growing, stable, or diminishing. And the same can be presented graphically in the form of age pyramid. A population with high number of young individuals, that is pre-reproductive individuals, as compared to the older organisms, is expanding or progressive type, while as populations with equal proportion of major three categories are said to be stationary populations. And if the number of older organisms is more than the younger ones, the population is said to be retrogressive or diminishing type. Now, the third and the last important secondary characteristic of a population is its genetic composition. Genetic composition of a population is determined by the number and variations of genes in it. Each and every population has its own genetic composition. The amount of genetic variation within local populations varies tremendously, and much of the discipline of conservation biology is concerned with the maintenance of genetic diversity within and among populations of plants and animals. This genetic variation is important so far as the survival of a species is concerned. Now, Various techniques are used for studying the genetic composition of a population. The most common technique for distinguishing different genetic forms of enzymes is by gel electrophoresis. In this technique, specially prepared samples of tissue are placed in a porous gel and an electric potential is applied, causing the electrically charged enzymes to migrate through the gel along the lines of electric force. Because slightly different forms of the same amino acid differ in charge, they migrate at different rates. A yet more powerful method for assessing genetic variation is to sequence a portion of DNA itself, a technique involving the use of molecular markers. Currently, the most commonly used molecular markers for studying population structure are microsatellites, which can be simple sequence repeats, that is SSRs, or short tandem repeats, that is STRs, mitochondrial DNA in animals, and chloroplast DNA in plants. Now, population growth. Growth is the fundamental dynamic biological feature shown by the populations of all species. Population growth refers to an increase in the size of a population and is determined by the number of individuals added to and or lost from the population. Population growth is never static and instead changes both in time and space. When environment is unlimited, the specific growth rate of populations becomes maximum and constant under such environmental conditions. On the other hand, if the supply of food or other resources is limited, the growth rate is typically sigmoid. That is, population growth increases slowly in the beginning, followed by rapid increase, and then becomes constant as it approaches the upper limit. The inherent power of a population to grow and reproduce when environmental conditions are favorable and resources are unlimited is called biotic potential, which is represented by R. Now, there are three types of growth models. One is geometric growth model, second exponential growth model, and the third is the logistic growth model. First, we will discuss about the geometric growth. Insects and plants that live for a single year and reproduce once before dying are examples of organisms whose growth is geometric. In these species, a population grows as a series of increasingly steep steps rather than as a smooth curve. Growth by such populations in which generations do not overlap can be modeled by geometric population growth, in which successive generations differ in size by a constant ratio. In general, the size of a population growing geometrically at any time, which is denoted by T, can be modeled as Nt is equal to N naught lambda raised power T. In this model, Nt is the number of individuals at time t, N naught is the initial number of individuals, lambda is the geometric rate of increase, and T is the number of time intervals or the generations. Second growth type which is found in populations is the exponential growth. In exponential growth type, population increases geometrically or exponentially until there is resource limitation or population growth is limited by other factors. Growth then declines rapidly until favorable period is restored. Such type of growth produces a J-shaped curve, and this growth model can be expressed mathematically as rate of population increase with time t, that is dn divided by dt is equal to Rn, where n is the population size, t is the time, and r is the intrinsic rate of natural increase. dn by dt represents the rate of change in population size. The value of this r is the maximum when resources are not limiting. Since the curve drawn between population size with population size on y-axis and time on x-axis is J-shaped, it is also known as J-shaped growth model. There are numerous species that do go through cycles of exponential growth followed by population crashes. But this growth model has certain limitations. Some of the assumptions of the exponential growth model, such as a constant rate of per capita increase, make this exponential growth a bit unrealistic. But it is possible for natural populations to grow at exponential rates for relatively short periods of time in the presence of abundant resources. Now, the third type of growth model is the logistic growth model. The growth of populations at a place where resources are limited follows a sigmoid or S-shaped curve showing minimum death during early stages. This type of growth, that is logistic growth, is characterized by following stages. The initial phase of slow growth is called lag phase. This initial phase of slow growth is followed by phase of rapid growth, which is called as log phase, and this log phase is characterized by gradual enhancement in the size of population. The rate of growth again slows down at the third phase called negative acceleration phase or decelerating phase. There is no further growth or no further increase or decrease beyond this phase. At this phase, that is after negative acceleration phase, the size of population fluctuates according to the variability of environment. This phase at which no further increase or decrease occurs is called equilibrium phase, and at this stage the birth rate is almost equal to the death rate. The size of the population at equilibrium phase is determined by the carrying capacity of the environment, which is denoted by K. Now, this carrying capacity is defined as the capacity of an ecosystem to support maximum number of individuals of a species. As the population size increases, then population growth rates declines as it approaches carrying capacity. Now, this sigmoid growth is thus density dependent and can be expressed by the following equation: dn divided by dt is equal to Rn k minus n divided by k, where n is the population size, t is the time, r is the intrinsic rate of natural increase, and k is the carrying capacity. Now, this term k minus N divided by K represents the environmental resistance, which is defined as the sum of the factors which prevent a population from reproducing at its maximum rate. Now, dear students, we have reached to the last part of this lecture, that is population regulation. In this section, we will learn how population size gets regulated. Now, the size of a population is regulated by a number of factors like availability of food, space, water, and pests. And these factors can be either density dependent, and the examples of density dependent factors are competition, predation, parasitism, disease outbreak, or herbivory. Or these factors can be density independent. For example, the environmental factors. In density dependent factors, competition, particularly the intraspecific competition, that is competition between individuals of same species, plays a major role in limiting the population size. Among the density independent factors, floods, fire, and other natural calamities remove large proportion of the populations and thus decrease their density. The number of individuals in a population at time t plus 1 or at a second stage is related to those at time t, that is at the initial stage, by the equation n t plus 1 is equal to n t plus b minus d plus I minus E, where b is the birth rate, d is the death rate, I represents the number of individuals migrating into the population, and E represents the number of individuals migrating out of a population. Now, the change in population size from one census to the next census can be obtained by the following equation. Delta n is equal to b minus d plus I minus E. Thus, if delta n, that is if change in population size is positive, the population will increase in size, whereas if delta n is negative, population will decline. If the number of deaths, births, immigration and immigration don't change with density, that is these parameters are density independent, then population will increase to infinity if delta n is positive, or will decline to extinction if delta n is negative. These two kinds of populations are said to be unregulated. If delta n is equal to 0, theoretically the size of the population will remain constant. The two scenarios of populations growing to infinity and declining to extinction are not observed in nature. Hence, this indicates that one or more of all the above mentioned demographic attributes are density dependent. Thus, density dependent control of one or all the demographic variables is necessary to explain population regulation. Now, dear students, let us summarize what we have learned in today's lecture. We have learned about various characteristics of population and what are different forms of population growth and how population size is regulated. Thank you for watching.